question? And I'll ask the clerk to please call roll. Oh, well,
Maybe not.
this phone. Those are accurate.
Okay, Cook,
Here.
Hopkins,
Here.
O'Donnell,
Here.
Patterson,
Here.
Richardson,
Here.
Aaron Scott,
Here.
Bill Scott,
Here.
Wampel,
Here.
Ormowski, Williams,
Here.
Mayor Ezra.
Here.
City Attorney's here.
Thank you. Let's see. I'll take one today. First item is the city attorney's report. Dean?
Thank you. 4 items on the agenda tonight. First is discuss the school resource officer agreements. They current agreements with the middle school and the high school expire at the end of June. The school district approached us, wanted to see if we go along with another 3-year contract for each school. Increase the amount they pay by about 2.5% per year for each of the 3 years. Talked to Tony briefly about it by email. I think he's from the Public Protection Committee, certainly in favor of it. It's a good program. Any questions at all about it?
No, very well.
Okay. Second, discuss downtown historic district. We have on the agenda tonight a resolution of support for the National Register recognition of the downtown historic district. We had also talked about a local landmark status for the downtown district. Again, keep in mind that the National Register District offers some tax benefits. It doesn't have any restrictions or guidelines or impose really any burdens on owners. The local landmark district is a bit different. We're not doing anything in our local landmark district tonight. Maybe I don't know if you want to add anything. I know there's some property owners that are here too, or at least one. Anything you want to add?
No, that pretty much sums it up. That all we're requesting is resolution of support for the National Register District. The federal budget did away with a 10% tax credit that everyone could have used in the last budget, and so there are some tax credits. Illinois is actually looking at one, and for both of those, the federal and the state, if it gets signed, they would require National Register, being in a National Register District. And you don't have to do that, but in order to take advantage of that, if a property owner so chose, they would have to be in a National Register District. It's actually saving property owners money on that front if they chose to do it. And also, we've had a property that looked into becoming individually listed, and it was going to cost them between $7,000 and $10,000 to go through that process. And so they wouldn't have to do that if they're in this district. They would automatically be able to take advantage of tax credits if they wanted to, but it's not mandatory.
Mike or Bob, anything you want to say or add?
Well, my biggest complaint was the local. I don't know that I trust the national, and at some point there's not requirements inputted, but maybe I won't care by the time they do that. But I don't like the district itself. Somehow I got in it and nobody told me I was gonna be in it, from my offices. And I went to the public hearing and I found out that not only am I aging, but I'm historic, because anything over 50 years is historic. My wife thought 100 was better. I felt better too when I thought about that it should be at least 100 if they're not going to call us historic by being over 50. But other than that, there's not a thing about my building that's got anything to do with historic. I don't know why anybody should kind of get to tell me or any of the rest of us that you got to keep your building looking old. So, and that would, by the way, I kind of walked around my neighborhood and everybody on the block signed it, except for, I didn't go to Norma Robinson, but nobody's in that building right now anyway. So no one in my block was in favor of it. And there's people in another block that are against it as well. And I think you probably all have the petition that did not include Mike Hayes' signature, although I've given that to the city attorney today. So that's really where I'm at, and I think everyone was against the local in my area. And plus we thought we got shot sitting, and we didn't know about it, and I went to a public hearing that to me was very clearly the final hearing, in the wrap-up, I'm going, whoa, where'd that come from? And I understand the suggestion that there was talk about a downtown historic district. In my mind, I'm 3 blocks from downtown. And I did not ever understand until I got a letter at the wrap-up that I'm in a historic district, or at least a planned and almost done historic district. So that's the frustration I felt, my wife felt, and I think all the other property owners in this block.
May I ask a question? So if they're involved in this, does this restrict them to what they have to do with their property?
No, the only thing that would ever come into play is if they wanted to use tax credits for an improvement project, then, because obviously you're getting credits, it's kind of like a grant program, then there would be some rules to follow. But if you don't want to take advantage of any of the tax credits for any work, then it's just regular building permit, just like anywhere else.
But we're just doing the national register.
Like national
Yeah.
just offers incentives.
Yeah, one
Yeah.
thing I would add, like Bob, I don't think I've got a lot of problem with the national historic district, because, I mean, there are obviously some benefits if you want to spend the extra money to comply with those to get 20% back.
Correct.
That doesn't give me a lot of heartburn. The issue over whether it somehow morphs into a local historic preservation commission, you know, I'm not so fired up about somebody telling me what to do. I've got 2 buildings down there on the square, and have worked to maintain those the way they've always been. But one thing I would just note, if you're going to consider at some point the local district, there are already a set of guidelines in the local ordinance that were adopted some time ago, the Jacksonville Main Street guidelines that do restrict what you can do downtown. And I saw some possibility that those could conflict with the local historic preservation, because if you know, I'm sure everybody knows about the Historic Preservation Commission, but it can be subjective. I mean, you know, if we want to do this, well, we don't think that would look good, all that, but there are some specific guidelines that are codified in the local ordinance. I don't know when they were put in, and it relates just to the square.
Quite some time ago, yeah.
Yeah, that relates just to the square and immediately surrounding that. I think if it goes any further than this and goes to a local commission, there needs to be consideration of whether those 2 things are going to conflict with each other, because they're pretty specific about masonry or brick on all 4 sides of the building and the windows and all that. And, you know, I could see a situation where the Historic Preservation Commission may say, we don't like that. Well, it's in the ordinance and it says you have to do it. So I think those 2 things should be looked at if it ever, but the national piece, I don't think I've got a big problem with.
Well, I think you should help Mike and not ever worry about that and never get to the local one. At least, and if you look at the map that you all have, well, you've already cut out the Lincoln Land Building, Central Laborers, the post office. And so I guess I just got lucky. I don't know why. But nobody asked me. Of course, the first question I asked at the public hearing was when you're going to redraw the map. I don't think that gentleman thought I was serious, but I most certainly was. There's nothing historic about my building. I don't think anything in the block. Now, maybe the courthouse. I have other thoughts about the courthouse and whether it's sufficient for our purposes today, but that battle I'm not going to fight. So I just, if that's something for downtown that's a benefit, okay, but you branched out to an area that, to me, and I have a hard time understanding, my building was built in 1940. Where's the story value to that? And at the presentation, for those of you that weren't there, the consultant had a slideshow, and he made a point that had a picture of some gentleman, and so we don't know who this is. He's on a bicycle, has a hat on, so he's a delivery man. And nobody knows who this is, but a way to memorialize him and honor him is to preserve the buildings the way they were back at this point in time. Now, for those of us that live today, I don't know what buildings we're going to preserve for us, because they all got to be like they were back in 1900 or whatever else. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me, that was the reason we would do this. And there are buildings that are historic in town, and they should be preserved, if that's what the landowner wants, and that's contiguous to what's around them. But I just don't, I'm not in favor of it where I'm at, and plus, I'm not downtown in my mind.
What I might add is, there is contributing buildings and non-contributing. We probably count yours as non-contributing.
Actually, they
It is
say I
contributing.
contribute,
It is
because
contributing.
remember, I'm over 50 years old,
Yeah, he's
so I'm historic.
That much.
He was pulled in.
I'm only that much older.
Hey, Dan, one quick question. I know that the local, if we got to a local commission, that would add a step to the approval process. And before we could go to Kelly for, anything that requires a permit would require us to go to the commission first, give us a certificate of, what's it called? Appropriateness, and then we'd have to take that to Kelly to get,
Right.
what you're talking about tonight, if this resolution were approved, would not require
No,
that.
no, no.
Correct.
And in many cases, in that first example you gave, if you would go to Kelly to get a permit and he checked to see it was in a certain district that required further
Right.
commission approval, then he would refer you on to that. But you're right, there is nothing at all in the National Register that would trigger anything further in the permit process.
On that level, Judy, I didn't know if you wanted to speak. The gentleman that spoke at your meeting about how the borders were designated?
Yes. The state, well, he was our consultant, and then the state reviews maps, and they like a contiguous districts. They don't like to see Swiss cheese and holes cut out of it. And they look for a density of contributing versus non-contributing buildings. So they don't want to see blocks of non-contributing and then all of a sudden one at the end. So that's why it took a weird shape. They reviewed and found that the density for contributing buildings was in this, not a square, it's just an odd little shape. But all of those buildings that are contributing are seen as adding to the character of downtown.
So there was an outside entity that came in.
In order to get the local designation, would you also then have to have the national?
I don't think we have to have the national in order to do a local landmark
No.
district.
You
The existing historic district is a mirror image. Whatever is in the National Register district is also in the existing local historic district.
Which is mostly residential.
Yes, it is mostly a residential district. Most towns do their commercial downtown as a district before they do a residential district. We do it different. And I don't know what the reasoning for that was back in the day when
We
they
can tear
did
down
it.
our buildings without question still.
Get a demo permit from Kelly and you can tear it down.
You can get through the EPA. You buy those
Yeah, you
back.
still have to follow all of Kelly's well, not Kelly, but you still have to follow all of the city's requirements for building, demo, anything like that. And in fact, even in a local district, we have demolition.
Sorry,
That
sorry, I'm
the
late, but
district actually approved.
if there was an empty
Or the
lot and
commission.
somebody wanted to put up a pole barn downtown, how do they do that, or can this stop that?
This would not stop it, but through Kelly's office, the permit process, there are some requirements as far as the building materials.
Well, the Main Street guidelines.
Main
would
Street
stop
has,
it.
Main Street has
guidelines.
guidelines for the B2 district.
And so if somebody also had a bunch of money and they bought a bunch of historical buildings and they raised them and put in a strip mall, there's really nothing we can do for that either.
If it met the zoning requirements.
I guess I don't understand what this is for then. I thought this was, first came up like 15 years ago as a way to stop that, and it sounds like it doesn't.
The National Register is more for the tax credits and for the tourism value, that you can put the signs up saying it's the National Historic Register. The National Historic Register does not carry any kind of restrictions on building improvements or demolition or anything like that.
The tax credits are the 30% one that costs a lot of paperwork to get, and the 10% one that got discontinued.
Right.
And then there was a state one that's not active yet.
State one is still in the works, it's not active yet.
I believe it's passed both the House and the Senate and it's waiting on the
I
governor.
think that's exactly right.
And I guess my whole concern with this was, if in fact this was going to be restraining at all to the people who are in these buildings now that don't want to be involved in it. And so if in fact that's not the national, then I guess that is, I'm good with this, it's a whole separate issue. So that was my whole concern. Before I had seen this, I was wondering if they were going to be restrained in any way by what they wanted to do with their building, since it's not.
I think it originally was, wasn't it? You pulled it out?
Yeah, we were gonna
It
ask for
originally
both
was.
at the same time, and now the commission has decided to just ask for National Register.
Oh, okay.
You would have had to vote on them separately.
Yeah.
Yes, there was.
No, I think we're voting on tonight is.
Just national.
It's just
Just
national.
Import tax, which, okay, that's a whole different issue.
Each office and same.
Anything further on that one? Thank you, Judy. Next one I have is discuss ambulance service. As we are now down to one ambulance provider, the ambulance commission met and has made a very good suggestion to amend our ordinance. Right now, we have a requirement of 4 ambulances at all times in the city. That's really not economically feasible for one single company to have. So the ordinance amendment is to drop that number to 3. If there's one ambulance provider, they have to have 3 ambulances in service. If we should happen to get a second provider, then the minimum would go up to 4 with at least 2 in each company. And this is with the emergency clause on the agenda, so.
It's amazing how things go in one big circle, from everybody wanting to be involved to now we're almost back to this,
Any questions about that at all?
which we need.
Was that the same requirement we had previously when we only had one provider?
I believe it was. And finally, discuss small cell wireless facilities deployment, which is gonna drive Kelly and I nuts before it's all over. I gave you a short handout from Illinois Municipal League. The legislature adopted a small wireless facilities statute. Small wireless facility are things that they hook on telephone poles or power poles that are for iPhones and iPads and computer tablets and so forth. More and more companies are wanting to put these on poles, and the legislature has passed a statute that in essence says they can do so, and if a local municipality wants to regulate them, they have to have an ordinance in place by the 1st of August for the statute that became effective the 1st of June of this year. If you do not adopt a small cell ordinance, small cell facilities ordinance, then a company could come in and attach their apparatus to our poles without any permission required at all. They could attach theirs to any privately owned pole, such as an Amarin pole or a GTE pole, simply with permission of that company, but not anything from the city. The model ordinance is about 18 pages. Importantly, it gives the city the right to regulate these. There's a fee involved pursuant to the model ordinance. If you have a company come in that's going to throw one device on one pole, the application fee is $650. If they're going to come in and put multiple devices on multiple poles and combine that into one application, it's $350 for each facility that they apply for. And finally, if they should locate on a city pole, then there's a $200 annual fee pursuant to the suggested ordinance, $200 annual fee. As you might guess, most of the poles you see around town are not city-owned poles. These are owned by Amarin or GTE or whoever it may be. Some of them, not many, are owned by the city. But we can still charge the application fee for non-city-owned poles. And then one of the requirements is they have to also provide proof that they have permission of the owner of the pole to hook their materials there. Another factor, without the regulations, if you don't regulate them, then they can pretty much locate their antenna, so to speak, anywhere on the pole that they want. The regulations included in the ordinance will have restrictions. For example, it must be at least 8 feet up in the air. You can't be higher than, say, 8 feet above the top of the existing pole and things like that. I apologize that there's not a lot of time to consider this, but that's just the timing that the legislature imposed, because I think they're getting a lot of pressure from the small cell wireless companies to get this on board. So that's where we are. We will have, unless you decide, give me an indication tonight, which Kelly and I wouldn't mind that much, that you don't want to worry about it, then we'll have an ordinance available, I should say ready, for first reading at the first meeting in July, second reading 2 weeks later. Any questions at all about that?
So how many devices are we talking about, the possibility on a pole?
It could be 0, if no companies decide to come here. It could be, they can have these spaced as no nearer than 100 feet apart now. So however many would locate here, it depends a lot on the 5G service and how strong it is now, how many companies want to get involved with the small cell and try to
How
improve
big
that
are they?
service.
Sorry.
They're not big antennas. What I have seen, they may be something like this, maybe a little bit bigger. Some have a power source of some sort down on the ground. Some municipalities are saying, we don't want anything on the ground. You have to put your power source up in the air along with the antenna itself.
How many did you say? How many?
I have no idea how many.
Well, if we don't regulate it, then you just have at it, right?
If we don't
If
what?
we don't regulate, we don't do anything, they just.
If we don't do anything, they show up and then they go wherever they want, however height on the pole they want, without us having any regulation or any fee involved.
Right.
We don't want that.
Well,
I think you should put together an ordinance for us to approve at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So
Okay.
what's the positive aspect of
A
these?
double dog.
Good idea.
I guess from a user standpoint, they greatly improve
Always the people.
cell phone service,
Is it cell
internet
phone or is it
service,
internet?
both. It's like wireless internet.
So you can get competition in the internet market here and the cell phone market.
I just need better
That's all I have.
Committee reports tonight, finance, IT, and personnel, Orman Cook.
You have with us, Adam with you tonight, that is going to give us the audit for 2017.
Okay. Everybody's got 2 booklets. One's super thick and the other one is not. We're gonna look at the bigger book. The smaller book is your federal single audit, which is required due to the inclusion of federal money within the water treatment plant loan, as it has the last couple of years. So that's not an every year thing. It just depends on whether or not we've got federal funds in excess of $750,000, which we do this year. Within that report is where we have to cite any findings in internal control, or material issues of compliance, and I'm happy to note that there were no findings, as has been the case in the past. If you go to the big book, the first page after the index, the first non-numbered page is technically page 1. That is the opinion from the audit, which is the whole reason the audit takes place. Essentially, this is the same opinion you've had in the past, which states that the financial statements are materially correct. It's what's referred to as an unmodified opinion. So everything within the report is within materiality accurate as far as the audit was able to determine. We skip to page, let's go to page 6. Page 6 is the balance sheet for all the governmental funds. So this is all funds other than police and fire pension, golf, utilities. You've got a column for general fund, a column for capital improvement, and then everybody else is combined into one total, and then you got a total column there. Some things to note, in the general fund, we always look at the amount of cash that is on reserve. And this calculation basically looks at the amount of cash at the end of the year, adjusted down for property tax receipts that came in during the year that are intended to fund expenditures of the next year, to get to essentially your reserve number. And when looking at that, reserves are sitting at about 7.5 months worth of general fund expenditures, which I believe in the past, it's been right about 7 months, 7.5. It always is pretty close to that same number. And in general, our firm usually suggests somewhere from 6 to 9, maybe even 12 months if you know something's coming down the pike, but 6 to 9 months is a good place to be, and we're kind of right in the middle there, so. In the next column, you got capital improvements. The cash in that fund is up a little bit this year for a few reasons. There's the video gaming tax that the city's been receiving for the last couple of years is sitting in that fund as it is intended to go towards future capital improvements. And it is a separate account in and of itself within that fund that's sitting at about $470,000. So over the last couple of years, that video gaming money has been a pretty substantial amount that can be used to go towards those future projects as the city and the council sees fit. Also, as you can see down below under liabilities, there's about a $441,000 bill there that is the exact same amount it was last year. That is an estimate for what the city is expecting to receive from IDOT for the finalization of some downtown work. In talking to IDOT and Skip and Andy, it sounds like it's very possible that may not get billed to us for years. IDOT usually is not in too big of a hurry to get their money back because apparently they're flush with it, I don't know. So that number may sit there for a little while, but without booking it and without having that estimate, we're really underestimating what that downtown project actually cost. Let's see, go to page 8. This is the same setup, same columns of funds here, and it's essentially revenue and expense of those same funds, governmental funds. General fund total revenue is down about $225,000, which is about 1.5%. Most of that, of course, there's some fluctuations, some are up, some are down, but within the intergovernmental line item, the replacement tax and income tax that we received from the state of Illinois was down about $250,000 this year, which is out of our control. That's more of an economic indicator more than anything. And you're going to see swings there from year to year, and in all honesty, 1.5% is not an enormous number when you're talking $14.4 million in total income. General fund expenses are essentially flat, down about 50 grand, which again, 50 grand when you're talking almost 13 million is a drop in the bucket. So nothing really to discuss too in depth there. Within capital improvements in the next column, the capital outlay expenditure is down quite a bit this year compared to last year. But again, last year included some big amounts for the downtown project, as well as some pretty big equipment expenditures for the fire department, if I remember correctly. All in all, for the entire government, not including golf, utilities, pension funds, total revenue is up about $675,000. A good chunk of which was actually included in the investment income, which we all know the market kind of went crazy this year and contributed pretty well to that return. Expenditures are down about $180,000, again, more or less flat when you're talking 18.1 million in total. Page 10 is the water and sewer and golf, the enterprise funds. Some things to note here. As I stated last year, one of the things you're going to see if you look at the water and sewer column down about halfway down the page, there's bonds and loans outstanding of roughly 32 million, almost 33 million. That is still not including the fact that 3 million of that is to be written off through the water treatment plant loan. Through discussions with EPA, that $3 million was not actually forgiven yet as of December 31st. I believe they said that took place in maybe February of 18. So we know it's going to happen, it just had not happened yet. So you got to keep in mind that of that 33 million, we're really only going to be required to pay back 30. Up above, total assets, water and sewer, the property, plant, and equipment are up about 13 million. The debt is up almost the exact same amount. That is, again, the water treatment plant that we all know about. Cash in water and sewer is up about 1.8 million, and I'll look at that a little further as we go to the next couple of pages. But in essence, that 1.8 million increase was by design. The repayment on those bonds for the water treatment plant is going to begin, or has begun, as a matter of fact, I believe it began in May. And the amount that's gonna have to be paid on that, principal and interest, in 2018 is 1.9 million. So the idea of the cash increase was built into the rates that were determined a couple of years ago when we knew this was all coming down the pike. The next page is the income and expense of those same funds. The water and sewer revenue is up about 185,000, roughly 2% from the prior year. It's rates held pretty steady this year, so any increase was basically usage related. If I remember right, there was almost no change in the rate for 2017 versus 2016. So it's basically all in usage. Expenses of the water and sewer are down about 400,000. Again, some are up, some are down, but a good chunk of that has to do with the fact that the IMRF pension has to get accounted for in here somewhere, and because of the fact that the market did so well this year, the net liability for IMRF that is part of the utilities fund decreased pretty substantially, to the point where IMRF is actually overfunded by about $471,000 within the utilities fund. So it's an anomaly. You don't see overfunded pensions all that often, but IMRF is kind of out of our control. We pay in what they tell us to, and the market does the rest. So it's a good thing to see, and in all honesty, looking back over the last couple of years, I think it was 90-some-odd% funded anyway. So it's always done pretty well, the IMRF portion for the city. And of course, we'll get to the pension stuff later. But the golf fund, nothing real exciting here. The revenue was down a little bit, about $28,000. But expenses were down pretty substantially too, down $89,000 from the prior year, which I think is just an indication of kind of staying within your means and doing what you can with your budget, more than anything. I can't specifically think of anything off the top of my head that would have caused a huge decrease. Page 14. I'll just touch on this because we'll look at it again a little later. This is the combining statement for police and fire pension. Total assets for police and fire pension are up from $2.9 million. And over the last 2 years, there's been an increase of $4.5 million. And again, those assets are at fair market value, so a lot of that has to do with of course, the contributions of the city to the pensions, but also the return on investments as well. Now you'll see that the liabilities are only $254,000. This particular financial statement does not include that net pension liability. This is the fund itself. The liability is to the city, not the fiduciary fund. So the next page, page 15. Similar results here. The net investment income is up about 1.4 million from the prior year, and up about 4.5 million up 4.5 million over the 2-year period. Total change in net position to the positive of 2.9 million is up about 1.3 million from the prior year. The next stop is actually not until page 30. And And we're gonna look at the same thing for IMRF, police, and fire here in a row, because I know the pensions is always a hot topic. So to look on page 30 here, the top chart that you've got there, top table, the middle column is what the actuarial discount rate was. So it's what the actuaries, this is the return on investments that they use to figure their net pension asset or liability. With that rate, IMRF would be overfunded by 1.2 million. If there was a 1% increase in the return on investments, you're talking about being overfunded by $4.2 million. So 1% makes a $3 million swing. And very similar if you have a 1% decrease, so return on investments is less than expected by 1%, you go to being underfunded by 2.4 million. So this is meant to show an actuary calculation is an estimate, and it's based on a lot of assumptions, and it's to show that those assumptions can be very sensitive to what actually takes place. The exact same comparison on page 40 looks at the police pension, and it's slightly even more drastic there. The assumptions by the actuary is 6.24%, which indicates a roughly $4 million net pension liability. You're talking about a $4.5 million swing to the better if there's a 1% difference, and about $5.5 million swing if there's a 1% decrease. So again, very sensitive to what actually takes place in the market. Same thing on page 49 for fire. Currently at 12.8 net pension liability, could fluctuate down to 9.2 on 1%, fluctuate up to 17.2 on a 1% decrease in the return. So not to hammer the point, but it's a number in time is hard to focus on when you don't know exactly what that return is going to be. On the next page, page 50, just gives you a breakdown of the total pension liabilities between IMRF, police, and fire. The far right-hand column, you got a total liability of $29.2 million across all three. That is actually decreased from just 1 year ago by $6.95 million. Last year was roughly a $36 million liability. So again, the market performance makes a huge difference here. Essentially, if you look at the tables in the back, the liabilities didn't change substantially, but the value of the assets went up enough that that's what's causing the decrease in the net pension liability.
So by liability, you're saying it's over and above what's in the account?
I'm sorry?
By liability, you mean that's what's missing?
Correct. The net pension liability is the actuarially determined liability less the value of the assets. Sorry, I'm trying to follow my notes here. Page 75. Again, looking at pensions, this is page 75 is the police pension, which this particular table shows the required contribution, the actual contribution, and the deficiency or the excess. As you can see, for 2017, police received about $198,000 in addition to what was required. Over the last 3 years, there's about $515,000 worth of excess contributions made by the city. Similar results on fire on the next page, $131,000 in excess this year, $347,000 in excess over the 3-year period. Page 79 gives you a lot more detail of what Mr. Klemowski was discussing or asking about. This shows the liability at the top of the table and the assets for the net fiduciary net position at the bottom of the table to give you that net liability or asset. Page 79 is IMRF, where you can see that negative liability, so you actually have an asset of 1.2 million, funding level of 1.4%, or 104%, sorry, compared to 92.5% in the prior year. Page 80 is the police. Net pension liability at the end is 17.4 million, down from 19.5 the prior year, so you got a 2.1 million to the better, and roughly 5.5% increase in funding percentage from last year, and about a 7% increase since 2015. Next page is fire, which is similar results, $1.5 million to the better as far as the net pension liability, 14.3 to 12.8, and about 4.5% to the better as far as percentage of funding, up about 8.5% over the 3-year period.
So what's the assumption on that? Is that 100% funded by a certain year?
I would have to look at the actuarial report. I know the one that the city sends into
Pension board.
correct, that kind of calculates the tax levy. That one, I believe, does have an assumption on there. Ron, do you happen to recall? Is it 2040 or something like that?
2040, yeah.
90%, right?
Right. And the assumption there, Adam, as we discussed earlier, you know, we talk about putting more in, or that's built into the levy. When they see our funding levels at this level, they're saying, oops, you guys better pay more next year to get fully funded. So the assumption is by them that if you pay the levy, you will be fully funded at 2040 without any intervention on as far as adding to the pension. So that's built into the tax rate. I mean, that's part of the assumption. Pay what we tell you to, and you'll be okay by 2040. It's not unusual for them to advance that date either. No.
And I think your numbers are 100% by 2035 or something like that, if I remember from last year.
So again, I would have to look at the actuarial reports for police and fire that come, because the pension board and the actuary that does these calculations are different people altogether. And the actuaries that do the financial side of it have to follow the standards that are applicable to the financial accounting of it. As far as speaking as a non-actuary and trying to speak to what the differences between the two are, I wish I could tell you, but I can't.
Well, later on this year, the pension boards, this year, the forced funding kicks in, so when that board figures out, they'll get a number that we have to meet, it won't be a suggestion, so that's something we're gonna figure out later. Plus, they changed all the standards for the state.
Right, and actually they changed some standards on the governmental side as well, the governmental financial side of it as well, so the actuarial report may differ a little bit going forward too. That when the GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, came out with the requirement to start including all of this in the report a number of years ago, that has been out there for probably 6, 7, 8 years. The requirement has only been implemented for the last 3 or 4. They've been tweaking the requirements on that ever since, and it's one of the things it's kind of like the IRS, where if they don't keep changing the tax code, they lose their job. So they've got to tweak it, keep playing with it, so that somebody's got something to implement, something to do. Believe me, I wish they'd leave it alone. The only other thing I was going to point out here is the very last page of the report, page 92, is just a an indication of tax values, levies, rates, extensions, collections. The EAV looks like it shot up dramatically from 239 to 250. The 250 is a little bit misleading because the rate-setting EAV, which takes into account the TIF and some other items of non-taxable property or lesser taxable property, is actually 247. So yes, it did go up, but not quite to the tune of the 250 in terms of economic impact. I don't know about everybody else. I know my personal tax bill shot up this year. I know they did some reassessments. I think it's roughly a third of the city every 3 years. So depending on where they reassess, can have a big impact on that EAV change. That is essentially my report. I don't know if it was quite 7 minutes, but I did a little bit.
We're not paying him extra.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, right. So we're doing good, right?
Yeah, you
All
got money.
Could have been 30 seconds.
You gotta learn that line.
I know.
We need to jump in.
Yeah, so we're doing it.
At 54% funded pension is good.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay.
Thank you.
As always, if anybody has any questions after the fact, I'm available if you want to get hold of me.
Take that.
I'll read through it, man.
What's that?
I'll read through it.
Yeah. After you wake up?
Where you going on? What, you done? No.
This is it.
No.
That's the money. That's the money.
You start the beginning, you finish it.
Now you guys just don't
Okay, committee reports, Parks and Lakes, Alderman Patterson.
Can turn over to Mr. Hall?
Thank you. The first item is the gazebo at Community Park. This is an FYI. Probably many of you have seen the bracing that we had to put on the gazebo. We had an actual emergency situation when the roofing contractor was on it, trying to begin the roofing process, and it was swaying so bad, they thought it was actually gonna fall down. With just a couple of guys on the roof. So we had an immediate problem. We called and received some engineering assistance who designed the bracing. Now we're waiting on the roofing contractor to get back on the roof, finish the roof, then we can fix permanently the bracing on the interior of the gazebo, pull the braces off, and the project should be completed. We just ran into this situation, but we are gonna have to fix it. So there's gonna be some added funds, some added expenses. I think Andy might have talked to you about this a couple of months ago, but Skip and I have talked about it. We should be okay there. In our capital improvement fund, specifically for Parks and Lakes, there's a few little things we are not gonna be able to do this year. So there's gonna be a little bit of extra funds left there, but I think we've got it planned out how we're gonna pay for that. So as you see the things happening out there, that's the reason why. I wanted you to know what was going on there.
What are the things that aren't gonna be done?
I didn't bring the list with me, but there's about $30,000 in capital improvement that we will not, or have not been needed to do this year, so. I don't have an exact list for you right at this time.
Thank you.
Questions? Next one.
Another FYI, 2 of the units at Community Park Center are down of the 6. The building has been there quite some time. It's about time for things to start happening maintenance-wise. And we did approach the seniors and said, the air conditioners run, quite a bit because you're in attendance at the building primarily, and they're going to ask ask their board at their upcoming meeting to maybe be able to provide us a little bit of assistance. We are prepared. We can absorb the cost in our operating budget for equipment repair. So we're not asking for anything additional. We just want you to know the status of that situation as well.
None of those units have ever been replaced, have they?
No, just, these are from, so they're 15 years old.
Right.
Thereabouts, Jeff. So it's getting time, and they're used every day a lot, because the building, the seniors are there a lot. The next item is the multi-use recreational trail at the lake. And Bill, would you help me out there and kind of go over we received the bids?
Yeah, we received 3 bids last Wednesday. KEVAS, Roland, and UCM. KEVAS came in as a low bidder. As we bid the project, we bid it all the way from Point 1 Road all the way out to Pine Point. And that price came in at $312,000. And after looking at that, there was an error on my part on one of the bid items, which really will reduce it down to $284. We had double or triple the asphalt on one of the alternates. The alternates, we have 4 alternates with that to cover some of the gravel paths, basically between Point 1 and the parking lot. There's a couple gravel paths where this parking lot's going to go. I believe it's Kelly's wish that those would get paved, because they're pretty rough for a bicycle to go on, and it's probably pretty uneven even if you're walking on it. I mean, I don't walk on it, haven't been out there, but from what I hear, it's pretty rough on some of the areas. So that would be $284,702 for a path all the way from one end to the other. That we just said from Point 1 all the way to Pine Point, and also a parking space area for 10 cars, I believe, over on Point 1 Road out there towards the boat area, boat docks out that area. There really is no parking area. It's parked on the edge of the road there, I believe. So, if you want to reduce it and go from Point 1 to basically where you go inside the gate on Westlake Road to about where the gas regulator is, it'd basically be right on the first curve on Westlake Road. We cross over Westlake Road there to go to the north side of the road now. That would end up being $210,042.
How much is the parking lot?
Parking lot is $6,500. That's for gravel and an A2 surface on it.
We haven't received any of that electronically, have we?
I'm sorry, Lori.
We haven't received any of this electronically?
Nope.
Nope?
No,
So how wide is the path?
It's 10 feet wide. It's just like in the report that we provided. It's 10-foot wide path, asphalt surface across the whole path, also some culverts at some areas where the ditches are.
Did the plan also take into consideration signage and other things?
There is some signage, yes.
All of that to
There's
incorporate
truncated
in?
domes, there's signage, there's
That's
crossing walks, it's all painted.
That's included in this,
That is
not just
included.
asphalt.
Everything but what we can't do out there. We've already cut trees, we've already done quite a bit to try to reduce the price of the bid. So there's some things out there that we were able to do, and, but everything is included to make the trail legal.
Right, we're looking at truncated domes at the parking lot area and where we come into Westlake Road. Signage at Westlake Road, stop signs at those 3 locations for the path side. So the path has to stop. And then also signage as you come into the parking lot area and also at Westlake Road for a share of the road area. Westlake Road will actually be a share of the road area then. And the parking lot's a share of the road because you're crossing over the parking lot.
So you said it was 284 is the,
If you went all the way from end to end.
and that's after the adjustment?
Yes.
On both bids?
Right. And it's still, KEVAS still is the lowest bid.
Was it 220 was what we had appropriated for that?
200.
Yeah, we put 200 in, just from capital improvement
Right.
to see where the bids came out. Actually, the engineer cost for the total was over 400,
Right.
wasn't it?
465
So,
on that.
yeah, so right now, the bids are actually pretty good.
I thought it was 200 from the gambling fund, not from.
It was, we talked about from the gambling funds is where this was to be funded from, yes.
Thank you.
So it's in the capital improvement budget, $200,000,
Yes,
so we're $85,000 short.
if we did from point one to Pine Point, yes.
So what's your recommendation?
Well, I'd like to do that, and then we complete all the way to the spillway, next year or so. And that cost would be very minimal. If we get, this is basically 2/3 of the way,
It's
while
sep-
the equipment's there, while we've got some good bids. Of course, I'd like to see it get done.
Do you have the extra
Kelly, if we-
85,000 in park right away?
It would,
We could
out
take
of
that
capital
80,
improvement.
Okay, wait,
80-some
one
thousand.
person at a time, please.
We take that 80-some thousand out of gambling.
Well,
No,
that's up to you guys.
no, we're gonna take it out of parks and lakes.
So.
No, Marcy, it'd be, the
But
whole
that's
thing's
capital.
funded out of the gambling fund.
No, so
200 was put, right, Skip, in capital improvement to begin with.
So this
From
way
the-
before out of park. gambling fund.
I don't have a problem. It's there.
Once
This
we
is what
approve
it's
it,
for.
so do we have to do that first? Prove taking $85,000 out of the gambling money in order,
You can do it all in one resolution.
And that would give you a path that's 7,700 feet roughly long. So, just almost a
It
mile.
would benefit how many citizens?
Well, there's, on a given weekend, there's several thousand out there. So, and the idea to get to Pine Point was to pick up, two fairly large populated campgrounds there so they could utilize the trail. And then from there on, there is no basic population out to the rest of the spillway. This would pick up the two campgrounds to the west.
So this path is just a traffic lane to go from one camping ground to another on the north side then?
Well, basically to get to, it's a recreational trail to get to the concession area, from the public camping spots, that type of thing. So people can walk and kids can bike and without getting on the main road. That's what we're trying to eliminate is people off of that road.
So is this also, this doesn't have carts on this?
Yes.
So yes,
Carts will be using this?
carts could be allowed, yes. But they would obviously yield.
That's not that It's pretty wide.
It's 10 feet, yeah.
Depending on what type of people are running.
No, bids did not.
Cars drive on one lane road, they pass each other.
Still not clear on where we're getting this money yet.
Gambling money. The excess would come out of the gambling fund and then put in the capital improvement, is where we're going,
we approved 200,000 for this project.
which is already
And
put
so
there.
now,
Right.
kind of on a knee-jerk reaction, we're saying we need an extra $85,000 in order to do that. I mean,
So the bidding process is open, like anyone can bid on it?
Yes. It's publicly advertised and put on the IDOT's bulletin. We had probably 4 or more people take out plans, but they didn't bid the project.
Is this a good year or bad year in terms of money for building, because like what are the road projects doing?
It's probably right down the middle. I mean, it's not super low. You're not getting super low prices, but the prices we've seen are higher. I mean, UCM was very high in their bid, almost 200,000 more.
Thing of it is, if you come back and do that short stretch there, it's gonna be more expensive.
Can be.
It can be, I mean,
More later.
oil could drop drastically, but I don't see it happening. Another hurricane can come through Texas and, wipe out more, but what if?
Do a lot of equipment.
So after this
Cheaper.
step, getting down to the proposed walk bridge, what would you expect to finish that?
Well, we'd have one more stretch, Mike, to get to the dam, and then you discuss, the bridge and so on would be up for discussion.
But to get us from here to there, What are you thinking?
I don't know. I have
It's
no
about a
idea.
third, this would be about 2/3 of the project.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
There's
you're
no
probably looking at
traffic.
another,
There's no traffic from Pine Point to the bridge. I mean, it's just
Right.
a road.
I think the idea with this was to bid it, knowing you wouldn't have enough money in your 200,000, because the engineer's estimate was
Right.
400 something. So the options you've got are either to go ahead and pony up the additional $800,000 from gambling now and take it, clear down to Pine Point, or take a look at that other option, and I'm not quite sure where it stopped, but come in at 210,000, you don't get as much done and add more to it next year and take a
Right.
chance on what the bids are gonna be next.
right.
I thought it was gonna be a multi-year project, where
It is.
It is, it's still more
Still.
multi-years to it.
If
We talked
if
about
we
it.
don't go to Pine
Right.
Point, then you're kind of
Yes, sir.
When we
messing up.
talked about, we talked about doing it in 3 phases,
Right.
and then we got it down to 2 phases, and this was the 1 phase that we were looking at for this year, and then connecting to the bridge the following year, and then finishing the bridge therefore after that.
So if you truncate it, it's like all the campsites on the north side except for Pine Point. So you kind of screw
Well, I guess-
over one campsite.
It'd be 2 campgrounds if you shortened it up.
If you stop at North Rock Point, you'd miss Morgan County Boat and Ski in Pine Point.
I guess the thing that concerns me is, I feel like there's lack of information just for tonight's vote, you know, with where we were and the historical information and we're gonna come up with the extra money. So, I mean, I'm in favor of a bike path or a recreation trail, but I'm not feeling very comfortable voting on this, not having all the information in advance of the meeting.
Did you read the plan when we approved it, like earlier this year?
The original,
The plan that.
Several months ago?
With the $10,000 plan that we approved.
several months ago, but we also approved $200,000.
Lori, you didn't get
That was
this,
that budgeted, right?
you didn't get this from Bill?
I don't remember getting
Right.
it.
It's not in you right now?
It should be in, we sent it last week.
This should be in your packets. This is the information provided on the bids and the bids received and everything.
I went through my electronic, was that electronically
What?
sent?
Give it
Roughly $500,000.
Kelly, was that just a new, is that recent?
Did you put that in our packet?
I did not.
Okay.
I thought that it was already in your packet.
So we're gonna have a path out here
I'll get you
for
copies.
golf carts, bicycles, and pedestrians, right?
That camp.
Or not.
You could go out there and use it.
Anybody can go out and park, that's his parking lot, and that's.
So they can do that now.
But the public can't take their golf carts out there. That's just for campers.
They could if they purchased the license.
Yeah, all you gotta do is get one.
Not a city license, you gotta get the park license.
Still, they can use it.
And right now, the golf carts wearing out grass areas.
Yeah,
But they're
I
doing it
saw them out
already.
the other
They're already
day,
doing it.
riding on there.
Do you want them to do that?
I want money, that's what I want. We can take it all the way around the lake.
Well, who's gonna have the right of way on it?
I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I would.
Get a lot of people out there exercising.
Walkers have priority.
Yeah.
People
We
on
don't have to
feet,
put
people
on train
on
tracks for
bikes
that.
have second priority. and
Do you wanna
people
leave this
on
on tonight, or
golf
do you
cart
wanna
are
pull
third.
it and have a committee meeting?
You can leave it on as far as I'm concerned.
I'm wondering why we didn't have a Parks and Lakes committee to talk about it in advance of the meeting, so.
We discussed that. So, do you want to vote on it tonight, or do you wanna pull it for a committee meeting?
Do we decide where the extra money's coming from?
When could this project start if we approved it?
Probably in about 20
Where it's
days.
coming from
So
anyway.
we get contract signed.
If we approve the extra $85,000.
Right. It could start in 3 weeks,
I would say pretty quick.
if we pass tonight.
There's 470.
We have to have two one vote? Two.
I think he's included that.
He said he could have it in one.
How are we gonna do this?
How many days is it taking?
Well, it would take two.
Basically for 45. 45 days from the day it opens, so it's good till August 4th.
We voted once when we did the budget, and this is the second vote, like everything else when we spend money, there's not 2 votes, there's only 1. So 2 votes are required to
No,
change ordinances.
I can adjust the resolution, but we can do that. If you want to approve $284,000, that can be done with just an adjustment in this resolution. You prepare it, hasn't been read yet. Just adjust that to say at a cost of $284,000 to be paid from the capital improvements budget, $200,000 and $85,000 transfer from gambling fund.
What was it, 400?
The whole thing's gaming anyway.
500.
Right?
I think it's still overfunded.
Well,
Not taxpayer money, it's paying for it,
this-
it's the gaming money.
We're gonna come back and do it anyway, so we might as well
Let's
just
do it now.
I mean, if we got the money, we're gonna go to the, so, you know, let's not just keep having another meeting. Let's get it done.
Kelly, the water truck.
Yes, we had in capital improvement, a used 3/4 ton truck to be used for the water tank. As you know, we've improved and increased a lot of the planting areas, the flowers, the parks and the lake and different various uptown and various places. And we borrowed the golf course's water tank for all this time, so it was silly to just not go ahead and get a tank for ourselves. And we would like a good used decent water or a 3/4 ton truck that'll hold the weight just to use for a water truck during the summer and then just general utility purposes during the winter. I asked the various car dealers and some used car dealers. The only reply I got back from anyone is it's a 2013 4-wheel drive 3/4 ton. It is listed for $22,500. That's the only response I got back from anyone. And we would like your consideration there. That's $2,500 over the guesstimate for $20,000 that was put in capital improvement.
You already have the tank?
Yes. We have the tank. It squats our half ton trucks. It's a 450. Even if we put 300 in it, you know, that's a 1.5 tons. So we really need that beefed up chassis if we can.
How many miles is on that truck?
It has quite a few. 3/4 ton trucks are hard to find. This one has 98.
The one we're purchasing or the?
98,
Yes.
one purchasing units of 2013,
Yes.
98,000 miles for 22,000.
Is the one the golf course uses good? Is there any benefit to consider purchasing one together, a nicer one, that can be used by both parks and golf?
Purchasing a truck.
A water system. So
Well,
how
the
many
water
years-
tanks are only $300.
Right, but how many years have you borrowed? We're buying
I
it.
don't know.
I mean, we got our own tank now, but as far as the truck, we've used our own truck, we've just passed it along between vehicles. And using a 1/2 ton truck, hauling that water tank is a lot of wear and tear and on the vehicle.
Kelly, is there any thought to give it to maybe buying a trailer and putting it on a trailer?
Yeah, we talked about that. Our summer help guys, we'd rather not have backing around a trailer
Oh,
with a 1.5 tons of weight on it. We talked about that.
this seems like a lot of miles on that.
Yeah, it does. A decent truck anymore will run 100.5 easy.
We got 50,000 left.
Well, I can tell you, I priced a brand new one if you wanna go that route.
That's what we're just talking about.
40 grand.
42.
Did you check state bid, Kelly?
Yes, I did.
For a new one?
I sure did. The price was $34,150 for 2018 XL 250 Super Duty Ford.
That makes more sense.
$34,150. If you wanna go that route, we'd be tickled to death.
So for the last 100,000
miles. You don't have any other 3/4 and a ton truck.
Just take it out of the gambling.
We
We
have
have
a
the-
crew cab that we use whenever we're going out for, my weed eaters and mowers going out. But to use a crew cab truck to run around just to water seems.
I was thinking if you could move that, then.
Yeah, we use those, though, we load up, there's 4 guys every time we go out to mow, you know, that's what those trucks are used for, with the trailers.
Les, you got one you wanna get?
I got a 1972 Chevy. They
Oh.
No.
It's got about 9,000 miles on it.
Yeah, a water tank not go in the back of it.
Oh, yeah, tank.
Big
That's a
truck.
lot of weight there.
You put 450 gallons of water, it's a lot of weight.
3/4 to a ton.
Is there a necessity that you have it this year?
Well, it's not an absolute It just put in capital improvement like anything else could. This was something that was requested and approved. I'm just telling you the only thing we could find at this point.
So I'm just wondering if we wouldn't be better off waiting until next year, put it in the budget and get a brand new one.
If you're
Well,
looking,
we could do that. We can get by if you wanna do that.
Can you survive for the rest of the season?
Sure.
Don saying a new vehicle?
We can, we can make do if you wanna talk about a new truck.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
About $12,000 more.
Warranty.
Three, or 4 year warranty, you got, you don't have 98,000 miles on it.
Well, I understand. This is just gonna haul water around town. We're not going on trips with it. I was trying to save a little money. If you guys wanna go a new truck, we'd be happy to
So
look
if
at
those
that.
kids dump that trailer, it's not gonna hurt you a whole lot.
No, but yeah, it depends on who they hit or what they back into.
There, if we do get a new one, is there something else you can combine these?
For that vehicle, I mean, yeah,
You ain't gonna be watering in the winter time, is what I'm saying.
right. No, I mean, we could have it plow snow. I mean, it could be just utilized as a work truck.
Kelly, this is a four-wheel drive?
Yes.
Do we need a four-wheel
I agree
drive?
with Don then.
Probably get a
so
new,
wait on that.
just standard
Next meeting.
3/4 ton. It is.
You might get a used truck.
We got a brand new
Trade
problem.
truck, get a new one.
Even cheaper.
It probably would unless unless it's wet or something like that.
What year of the 5-year plan is it in?
What?
What year of the 5-year plan is it in?
What year and what?
In the 5-year plan, is it coming up this year? You know, your 5-year plan?
A truck
Yeah.
in the 5-year plan? No, I don't think so.
Okay.
If you guys wanna wait, that's fine. We
Seems like the
can
consensus
wait
is to wait.
propose a new one.
You guys like that?
Yeah, wait.
Okay, we will dismiss this meeting and go into the other room.
of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll resume the workshop in Planning and Public Works. Oh, we got one more.
Swimming.
Swimming. Any swimming regulations, Kelly?
Yeah, when we removed the do not swim at the lake, we discussed then implementing some swimming regulations. We put those together. Marcy looked at them, Dan looked at them, and they should be before you, I hope.
They were electronically, yes.
Okay, good. This will just be added to the section under voting. These are guidelines, common sense stuff to go by if we're gonna allow swimming now at the lake.
Common sense.
What does Alderman Patterson think of the rules? That's my question.
I'm good with the rules that we came up with. I added the rules about different diseases and waterborne products. That was my addition to it.
That was an interesting,
You're welcome.
Are the rules in the printed pack or just online?
They were like, they were common sense. I was actually surprised that we had put it in writing.
It's like no limbs falling off and stuff like that?
Firecrackers in your mouth. Common sense.
Okay, good planning and public works, Alderman Scott.
We have one item tonight, Mr. Mayor, discuss awarding bid for the MFT project. They went out for bids and got one bid back. Mr. Burke's not here tonight. That one bid was from Illinois Road Contractors, and that was for $153,168.16.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. Public Protection, Alderman Williams.
Thank you. I have two, and I'll have the chief come and talk about them, but it's, the first one is discuss police department surplus vehicles.
Thank you. I put on a request permission to sell and declare a vehicle surplus. It's a 2001 gold Jeep Cherokee. Basically, the vehicle's maintenance and mileage have exceeded its worth to the police department. I'm not even sure why we have, it was a seized vehicle from several years ago. It sits on our back lot and the tires go flat occasionally and we don't use it, so I just want to sell it and get it out of our fleet. Is there any questions about selling that vehicle?
What's the miles on that?
It's a lot, like 100 and some thousand, I'm not exactly sure.
That's good.
Anybody else? Second one is discuss advertising bid for the purchase of a K-9 vehicle for the Jacksonville Police Department. And that's out of the federal forfeiture.
Okay, so the current vehicle we have that we're using is 8 years old. It is going into the shop on a regular basis for maintenance. I brought a list of that maintenance just for the last year. It got to the point where we took it to Westtown Ford for an alignment and they refused to align the front end until it had significant repairs done to it. Luckily, we have Coop at the city garage who was able to fix some of that stuff and put it back together to make it drivable. But I brought from last year, it's been in the shop 15 times, and currently it needs a new catalytic converter in its exhaust system, which the estimate was $1,700. So it needs replaced. That was a recommendation from Coop, the head mechanic, that we look for a replacement for it. So I know I didn't put it into any kind of capital improvement or any kind of budget this year, but there is a surplus of funds in the federal forfeited funds that have been replaced since I bought the last vehicle for our drug agent, and that now has been replenished to the point where I feel like there is enough money in there to outfit a new vehicle, which we bought for bids, just like we do for the regular squads. It would be a match squad for our fleet. The one right now wasn't ever a police car. It was just a Ford Explorer that we transferred into a police car. This will be actually have a police chassis and match the rest of the squad cars in our fleet. So if there's any questions about that, I'd be glad to answer them.
I just want to have you ever had anyone get in contact with the Buffett Foundation?
We talked to them once or twice, and he likes to keep his stuff local to Macon County. Okay. So this is about as close as we can get to that with the federal forfeited funds, because it doesn't cause any burden to the taxpayer. It comes all out of the funds from the federal government that we've accumulated over the years.
Okay.
Good. Thank you. That's all I have.
Let's see, any public comment? Yes, Nick.
I just wanted to ask if the new swimming regulations for Lake Jacksonville, if they're gonna be posted strictly online, or are they gonna be posted at the lake, and where can people find these rules?
They'll be posted at the lake, and we'll make sure you have a copy of online as well.
When are they gonna be
It'll be
posted?
under the city's website with the rest of the rules and regulations.
Okay. And is it gonna be immediately if it's passed tonight, or?
Yes.
We can probably send out a press release tomorrow, huh, Cal?
They'll be on there, yeah, immediately.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. Well, I know, okay, next meeting we'll do that. We'll adjourn and we'll